Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Melissa DeRosa, Democratic strategist and former secretary under New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Brittany.
I want to talk about where we are now and when we last talked. So we last talked, you were one of my first conversations post-debate Friday morning. There was a mix from you as a Democrat, shock and anger. Now we sit here, it is Wednesday afternoon. How have your feelings changed, developed? What are you thinking?
I mean, I think the shock has sort of worn off. The anger has set in. But now it's also time to be like, where do we go from here? And it's time to be constructive and pick a path. And I think that that is where the party is moving very, very quickly.
And you wrote a piece this morning about President Biden's debate performance as well as the fallout from that. And it's titled this: Stop Gaslighting, Get with Reality, Make a Choice Fast. First, let's talk about the first half here. Talk about the gaslighting. Who's responsible? What are they saying?
Well, you know, as I write in my piece, there's a couple of theys, right? It's like they did this. And one they is the White House, the top people at the White House, top people in the Biden campaign, potentially cabinet secretaries, United States senators, members of Congress, and the first family. And then there's the they, which is the media, which very clearly looked the other way on this story for at least months, if not a year plus. And so on both of those fronts, it's incredibly dangerous, right? Trust in government is already at an all-time low. This only reinforces that. Trust in the media is at an all-time low. Donald Trump famously dubbed fake news in 2016. And ever since then, you have seen faith in media in every poll go down lower and lower and lower. And there was a Wall Street Journal piece that came out a couple of weeks ago where they said that Biden was slowing down, losing a step behind the scenes. And the pushback on that piece was fast and furious and sort of universal. And it looks like the reality is that that reporter was right. And all of the people that were pushing back on it were lying. So, it's both sides, because the media also was not quick to jump on the Wall Street Journal's bandwagon and say this is true and write a series of stories about it. They sort of got defensive. So it hurts everyone on all fronts, and it's the worst possible thing that could happen for government and democracy.
I want to talk about that, like the trust in media a bit there, because if someone were to suggest pre-debate, obviously, that President Biden was showing signs of slipping like the Wall Street Journal did, there were some gaffes over the past year that have accelerated, they would be considered fringe, potentially right-wing propaganda. What do you think the lesson is here?
The lesson is call balls and strikes. I wrote about this in my column. Jill Abramson, who used to be the executive editor for the New York Times, put out this statement yesterday that was mind-spinning. Because on the one hand, she was taking the White House and the Bidens to task for this massive cover-up, as she put it, and then sort of lambasting the media for failing to do her job. But she had this one line in her statement where she said, "I fear that the reporters didn't want to write these stories because it could be viewed as helping Trump. Which I understand, ... No, what? Which you understand? This is why no one has faith in the media, because the media's role is not to be an activist. The media's role is, regardless of favor, regardless of personal feelings, regardless of editorial board leadings, to call balls and strikes. And it's clear that over time, that responsibility has eroded, which has led to this situation where we all kind of talk to ourselves, right? We've got curated Twitter feeds, curated social media channels. If you want to hear one version of reality, watch Fox News. If you want to watch a different version of reality, watch MSNBC. And it used to be that there was one truth and you would make up your mind. And the country's media system has completely broken down. And so now no one's going to trust anything.
Well, that brings us to the second part of your headline. Get with reality, make a choice fast. What are the two choices? Because you lay out these two very clear paths Democrats are now confronted with.
Well, last time we talked on Friday, we were talking about how all this fantasy football was going on. Michelle Obama, Gavin Newsom, who could it potentially be? Maybe somebody we're not thinking of, Leon Panetta, whoever. But, 5 days later, the smoke has cleared. There are two paths, and there's two reasons why there's two paths. One is the Biden-Harris campaign has $240 million in the bank. Campaign finance rules make it so that that money cannot be transferred. So if someone other than Biden or Harris are at the top of that ticket, it's like you're setting that money on fire. You can't transfer it to anyone. You're starting from literally zero. So that very practical reality has to play a role in this conversation. Two, the polling numbers that have come out in the last several days have actually shown in head-to-heads that Harris is best positioned to go against Trump, other than, even when you consider Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, and Pete Buttigieg. And so when you have those two things that are staring you in the face, coupled with the fact that the Democratic Party, big tent party, we value women, we value minorities, we like to lift people up, how we could possibly circumvent the first ever Black female vice president, given that she's polling stronger than the others, and given that you lose $240 million, your options are clear. Either you stick with Joe Biden and pray to God that Donald Trump implodes and that Joe Biden plays error-proof ball and he goes out and he sits with the New York Times and he sits with 60 Minutes and he does unscripted events and he stops speaking just at teleprompters, and that somehow, everything comes together in a perfect storm for him, which is highly unlikely, but could happen. Or you switch horses and you go to Kamala Harris. She keeps the money. She gets elevated to the top of the ticket. She gets to pick a new VP, which I suggested Josh Shapiro, who is governor of Pennsylvania. So you get, potentially pick up a swing state with those politics, and you hope that the energy of this historic nomination carries you through to the finish line. But I do not see anyone else as a viable alternative at this point.
So let's just get this straight. You just want to squash the rumors of the Michelle Obama fantasy. I mean, she herself has said she's not getting back into politics. The Gavin Newsom, the Gretchen Whitmer. This is fantasy, and Democrats either have Biden or Harris, and that's it.
That's right. And we have 35 days. The deadline is not the convention. The deadline is the Ohio presidential ballot certification, which takes place on August 7th. There's a quirk in the law. It happens in advance of the convention. So really, we're staring at August 7th, which means as of today, we have 35 days to figure this out. And every day that we waste spinning around talking about these unrealistic options and flailing about sort of, blaming one another and reading these stories in the press, leaked stories about where everybody is another day that favors Donald Trump. And ultimately, if the goal of the party is to keep the country and keep going on a certain trajectory, then we've got to get our act together quickly.
So let's talk about the first path of Biden staying in this race. When you and I talked Friday, you mentioned that you were looking for the response of the party elders. The party elders have responded, and publicly, former President Obama said, hey, this was a bad debate night, but Biden's the better option. Former President Bill Clinton said, hey, debate aside, once again, Biden is better than Trump. What do you think of their public responses?
I mean, I think that the fact that their public responses have been confined to Twitter, have been confined to social media, is all you need to know. Neither one of the former presidents is out doing sit-downs on the front lines, defending Joe Biden and saying, I know this man, he is up for the job, he can do the job, I've served alongside him, I've had that job, I know what it takes, and I know he's up for it. Neither of them are doing it. And now you're starting to hear stories where privately Barack Obama is, voicing concerns to staff and to others about what this could all mean and if he could win. And so I think the muted response tells you everything. Neither of them are playing sort of a leadership role in ushering Joe Biden off the stage, and they're not playing a leadership role in defending him, which also tells you a lot about sort of where the party in general is. There's a real lack of leadership from the top on down, which is why I think you're seeing all of this flailing and infighting start to spill into the press.
And I'm not comparing the two instances at all, but the last time we saw this level of chaos in a party, Republicans infighting about Kevin McCarthy and the House Speaker fight, this feels like that type of infighting on steroids. Politico reported the dam is starting to break with Democrats. There was a Democratic congressman who asked Biden to step aside publicly yesterday. A few Democrats have said that They think that Trump's going to win ahead of Biden. One even said, and I'm okay with that. What do you think about the Democratic lawmakers' response so far?
Look, ultimately, everyone is about themselves, right? This is politics. And so there is the top of the ticket damage, which could be that we lose the White House, which the effects of that are, it's an unmitigated disaster. It could be more Supreme Court judge picks. It could be general picks if you're controlling all three, houses of government, all three branches of government, like, what does that mean practically speaking? There's the trickle down effect. If there's someone who's really weak at the top of the ticket and you know that they're going to lose, then the member of Congress that is on that same ticket has a greater likelihood of going down. So I think what you're starting to see is some members of Congress voice their opposition to this. They are, putting their finger into the wind and seeing where it blows. And they're getting out in front and saying, well, I said he needed to go, because they're concerned about how it's going to impact them. And I think that's just the reality of how politics work. Reporters call up, they put the camera in your face. What do you think? How can you possibly stand by this? They start to feel a little bit of pressure. And then, as Ernest Hemingway famously said, how do these things happen? Gradually, and then all at once. And so, like, when you see the dam break, it will come fast and furious. If it breaks, Biden's doing everything he can today to try to stave it off, but we'll see how quickly this breaks.
So let's talk about President Biden and his response. Friday, he indicated, I'm staying in this race. He had a few speeches. Today, the New York Times reported that he told a close ally he's reportedly weighing whether he should stay in the race. The White House pushed back and said that is not the case. He has a George Stephanopoulos interview this weekend. Part of it's coming out Friday, the rest on Sunday. What do you think is going on in his head? Do you think he's planning to stay in?
He's fighting for his life. He's fighting for his political life right now. And I think he's doing what his advisors are telling him he should be doing in order to assuage, voters' concerns and party members' concerns and show everyone he can do this. I think that they're doing it wrong. I think that going out immediately and putting him up with only teleprompters, gives people something to say. Oh yeah, he's fine on a teleprompter, but like, what about when he's not on a teleprompter? I think being in these very scripted settings is problematic and not doing enough to assuage voters' concerns. And sitting down with George Stephanopoulos, who I personally have a tremendous amount of respect for as a journalist and as a former public servant, I'm not the right choice. Because number one, it's a pre-taped interview, which is going to allow those who want to spin conspiracy theories about what was left on the cutting room floor to spin those conspiracy theories. And two, he's a former top aide to President Clinton. And so he's someone that I think the right and the middle could be convinced is not, the most unbiased person to be doing this particular important interview. And so I think, just to answer your first question, Joe Biden is fighting for his political life. He's got the governors, a meeting with the governors, Democratic governors today to try to keep them on the reservation. He's working the phones with congressional leadership, and he is doing everything he can to stay exactly where he is. And the question is, will it be enough?
And do you think it will be enough?
On this trajectory, no. I don't think it will be enough. If something happens, if they start doing things a little bit differently, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he can be very convincing publicly. Maybe he has enough goodwill garnered where he can get people to hold off. But I think if you see a couple more polls coming out, if the New York Times Siena drops later today, for example, or tomorrow, and shows, their last poll, Trump was up 3. If it shows that Trump is up 5, Trump is up 6, Trump is up 7, I think you're going to see the house of cards come falling down. This is going to be a numbers game.
So now let's talk about option number 2. Kamala Harris becomes the nominee. Do you think that's the better option? Would that excite more voters who feel disenfranchised right now, who say, hey, this isn't the person I voted for in the primary, meaning Joe Biden?
Look, these are 2 bad options. This is, picking between 2 bad options. I don't know that one is favored over the other. I think that we're in uncharted territory on both. Kamala Harris is someone who historically has been very unpopular. At the same time, she would be a history-making candidate. She is incredibly articulate. She is incredibly forceful. I could see a situation where she were to debate Donald Trump and where she, wipes the floor with him. I think she can be very strong and good. We've seen that from her in past debate performances. I think she would have a lot of energy to run around the country. But for whatever reason, historically, she has polled incredibly poorly. And so I think you will see a boomlet immediately if she were to take the reins, where there would be a burst of energy. I think you would see a round of press from the mainstream media that would be positive towards Kamala Harris. And then I think, it's not going to be about the first week, the second week. It'll be the 6, 8, 12 weeks that follow. What comes from there? And it's just unknown. And so it's neither of these two choices are great options, but we got to pick one, unify, and go.
I am thinking, or a lot of reporting that has come out has said that the writing has been on the wall for President Biden for a while. A lot of top aides, advisors shielded him from lower levels of the White House, the press, lawmakers. Wouldn't it have been a better option last year if these top aides realized that, to have President Biden come out and say, hey, I'm going to pass the torch to the younger generation, like Nancy Pelosi did with Hakeem Jeffries, and then you wouldn't have to have Kamala Harris because Democrats aren't thrilled about her according to polls, and B, Democrats could have been excited about someone who's not a 2020 rematch. Do you think that that was a missed opportunity by Democrats?
Yes, unquestionably. I think that Joe Biden, being 81 years old, should have last year, a year ago, said, I did what I said I was going to do. I won the country back. We took the country back from Donald Trump, who was, a problem of epic proportions for all of these different reasons. I stabilized things post-COVID. I came and did what I said I would do. And now it's time to pass the torch. It could have been an open primary. You could have had Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer and Josh Shapiro and Wes Moore and Kamala Harris and all of these people go in. Then the Democratic electorate would have been able to vet them, air their potential baggage, see what attacks stick and don't stick. A lot of times people are good on paper, but then you actually see them on stage or on the national field and they fall apart. There's a reason you need a robust primary process. And then the cream would have risen to the top. We would have gotten the person that the party truly wanted to get behind, and you would have had this burst of energy going into the Donald Trump election. And I think that we would be sitting here today +4, +5, +6. I don't think we would be anywhere close to where we are right now.
So obviously that didn't happen. That's not the case. Now we're presented with these two options, as you're saying. How do Democrats get voters excited and regain that trust?
It's going to have to be that, if it's Joe Biden, he's going to have to barnstorm. He's going to have to keep up a rigorous schedule. He is going to need to be out there doing unscripted things, doing unscripted interviews, sometimes unfriendly audiences, and prove to people that he is up for this job. And the Democratic Party is going to have to decide if it's him, we're all going to shut up and fall in line, which is something Democrats are not very good at. If it's Kamala, we've got to hope and pray that the historic nature of her candidacy excites young voters, excites, the African-American base, excites females, and that it gets enough people to drive out that we're able to overcome what already is an enthusiasm gap between us and Republicans. And she's got to be out there appealing to the middle. So look, on the one hand, she comes with all the Biden baggage, right? Because they can say Bidenomics caused inflation, and that's your inflation, Kamala Harris. The Middle East is falling apart and you didn't do anything about it. Immigration, that's you. And so she's still going to have to answer for Joe Biden's record and, get more nimble and go on offense and articulate a vision. But there will be this feel to that campaign that it's history making, that it's exciting, and hopefully that would be enough to propel forward and sort of give us the reset we need. But again, neither are great options, and both are far from a sure thing.
Well, as Democrats pick...
How is the play, Mrs. Lincoln?
Well, when Democrats make the decision, which it feels like, or it seems like there's going to be a holiday weekend here, then the George Stephanopoulos interview, and as the dust settles here, a decision's made, Democrats choose a path. I hope you come back on and we can break it down further. Melissa DeRosa, thank you so much.
I would love to. Thanks for having me, Brittany.